Under the silver moon, an omega marked by betrayal meets the alpha king destined to claim her heart. In a world ruled by instinct and power, their bond will either heal the scars of fate, or ignite a war of desire. Octavia had been the kingdom's most radiant jewel, graceful, adored, the very muse of poets. Her laughter was a melody that once breathed life into banquet halls. Now, that sound was a ghost, drowned by a silence so deep it ached. She lived alone in a cottage that was little more than a skeleton of wood and stone, perched at the edge of the dark woods where even the birds fell silent at dusk. Each morning, she woke to the cold kiss of the wind slipping through cracked walls. Her hands, once soft and adorned with silver, were now a map of scars from hunting and splitting wood. Her silk gowns had long since turned to rags. Yet, the dirt could not erase the regal straightness of her spine, the quiet dignity in her weary eyes. Villagers who dared the forest path whispered warnings to their children. "Beware the woman in the woods," they hissed. "She murdered her husband for his gold and was cursed to live alone." Children, brave in their cruelty, would throw stones at her door and flee, their laughter echoing. Octavia never gave chase. She would only stare at the moonlight painting her floorboards and whisper into the emptiness, "You know the truth, don't you?" On nights when the loneliness became a physical pain, she would sit outside with her bow across her knees, her gaze fixed on the moon. It was her only confessor, the sole witness to how her world had burned. Sometimes, the wind would play a cruel trick, and she would almost hear Cedric's voice in the rustle of leaves, almost catch the faint, familiar scent of him on the air. But the forest offered no comfort. It was a tomb of memories, reminding her only of all she had lost, her home, her name, her peace. As dawn bled light into the woods, Octavia would rise, her bow clutched like an anchor. Another day to survive. Another day to live among ghosts. But beneath her quiet endurance, a storm slept in her heart, waiting for the day the buried truth would claw its way back to life. The next morning arrived, pale and frosted. Silver lace edged the window of her cottage. She stood by the dying embers of her fire, arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring into the ashes as if they held the secrets of her past. Her mind drifted back, against her will, to a time before the ruin. The memory came unbidden, warm and vivid, the scent of cedar, the golden light of a home that echoed with joy. Her fingers trembled as they found the small pendant at her throat, the last tangible piece of him. The past, no matter how deeply buried, was refusing to stay dead. There was a time when the name Lady Octavia of House Vaughan was spoken with reverence. The marble halls of her husband's estate had danced with the music of her laughter. Servants admired her gentle spirit. Nobles envied her effortless grace. And at the center of that radiant world stood Lord Cedric, her husband, a man woven from honor, courage, and a tenderness that could disarm the hardest heart. He was the kind of lord who would set aside his sword to kneel beside a wounded soldier, who would pause a royal feast to ensure the lowest scullery maid had been fed. He ruled not with an iron fist, but with unwavering fairness. And Octavia, bright, warm, life-giving Octavia, was the heart that kept his world turning. Together, they were a perfect, unbreakable tapestry of devotion. And at Cedric's right hand stood Eli, his childhood friend, his most trusted confidant. They had fought battles side by side, built their fortunes together. To the world, Eli was the picture of loyalty, charming, eloquent, and steadfast. But behind the courteous smile festered something dark. From the moment Eli laid eyes on Octavia, his heart betrayed him. Her laughter became an echo he chased in his thoughts. Her kindness haunted his dreams. He watched, tormented, as she touched Cedric's arm when she laughed, as she looked at her husband with a love that left no room for any other. What began as admiration soured into a desperate longing, which curdled into a consuming obsession. He told himself it was love, but it was a hunger, a selfish, monstrous craving to possess what was never his. At first, he buried it deep, masking his desire behind polite gestures. He brought her gifts, a rare book from southern markets, exotic flowers that bloomed only by the Silver River. Octavia, ever gracious, accepted them with innocent thanks, never seeing the dangerous glint in his eyes, never hearing the possessive edge in his compliments. One evening, under the soft glow of candlelight, the three of them dined together. Cedric spoke of trade routes and council meetings, but Eli heard none of it. His entire world had narrowed to the gentle curve of Octavia's lips as she sipped her wine. Later, when Cedric had retired, Eli found her in the moon-drenched courtyard, tending to the night lilies. The silver light seemed to worship her. "You have a kind heart, my lady," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Even the flowers bloom brighter for you." Octavia smiled, wiping soil from her hands. "You flatter me too much, my lord. My husband says these lilies thrive because of the soil, not me. But the soil never smiled at them as you do," he whispered. The words fell between them, heavy and inappropriate. Octavia froze, the smile vanishing from her face as she finally understood the tone beneath his charm. "My lord," she said, her voice soft but unyielding as stone. "I am your friend's wife." He took a step closer, the air growing thick. "I know," he murmured, his eyes clouded with a desperate want. "But sometimes I wish he wasn't." Her expression hardened, not with anger, but with a profound disappointment that cut deeper than any blade. "Do not speak like that again," she said firmly. "As long as my husband lives, my heart belongs to no other." The rejection was a physical blow. Eli flinched, his pride, the pride of a man who had always been admired, twisting into something venomous and foul. He bowed stiffly and walked away, his heart burning. That night, he stared at his own reflection in the dark glass of his window, and a monstrous thought took root, whispering from the shadows of his soul. "If her husband lives, she will never look my way." The thought, once unthinkable, began to feel like a necessary justice to his wounded ego. Then he must not live. From that moment, a slow and poisonous plan began to unfold. Eli watched Cedric with a new, predatory focus, his routines, his habits, the specific goblet he drank from each night. He began weaving a web of quiet alliances, planting seeds of rumor among the servants about Cedric's wealth, about Octavia's supposed ambitions. A few months later, Cedric fell gravely ill. The physicians were baffled. His strength faded with terrifying speed. Octavia never left his side, her tears soaking the sheets as she begged the gods for mercy. Eli stood beside her, a perfect portrait of grieving loyalty. On the fourth night, Cedric left her, whispering her name with his final breath. Octavia's scream was a sound of pure agony, a shriek that tore through the manor and echoed down the corridors like a soul being ripped in two. Eli held her as she shattered, pretending to offer comfort, while inside, a sick satisfaction bloomed. Now she was free. But she did not turn to him. She did not seek his comfort. Instead, she locked herself away, drowning in a grief so absolute it left no room for anyone else. When she finally emerged, she was clad in black, a color she would wear for eternity. When Eli tried to approach her, his words hollow, she stopped him with a look of devastating clarity. "Do not mistake my grief for loneliness," she said, her voice raw. "My heart is buried with my husband." That final, gentle rejection shattered what was left of his humanity. His twisted affection curdled into pure, undiluted hatred. If he could not have her love, he would ensure she had nothing at all. Chaos, meticulously engineered, swept through the manor. Rumors, once whispers, became a roaring fire. Eli moved with a spider's cunning, planting forged letters that spoke of Octavia's greed, her discontent, a fictional affair with a merchant who promised her freedom. He bribed and threatened her maids until their testimonies painted her a monster. By dawn, the illusion of her guilt was complete, a masterpiece of deception. The council trial was held in a chamber thick with judgment. Octavia stood before them, pale and trembling in her widow's gown, a ghost of the woman she once was. "My lords, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I have been framed. My husband was my entire world." But Eli's performance was flawless. He knelt before the council, tears streaking his face as he held aloft one of his forged letters. "I loved him like a brother," he choked out, the very picture of betrayed devotion. He trusted her with his life, and she betrayed him for gold. The murmurs in the hall turned venomous. "Murderer! Traitor!" The words hissed through the air like snakes. The council members exchanged grim, resolved looks. No one questioned Lord Eli, the loyal friend who had tried in vain to save his brother. Then, the Queen Mother, Beatrix, entered. Her golden robes swept the floor like a tide of judgment, her face a cold mask of sorrow and disgust. "Lady Octavia of House Vaughan," she declared, her voice ice. "For the crime of murdering your husband, Lord Cedric, you are hereby stripped of all titles, lands, and honor. You are banished from this kingdom until death claims you." Octavia's knees buckled. "Your Majesty, I am innocent. Please, look into my eyes. I loved him." But her pleas shattered against hearts of stone. The guards seized her, dragging her toward the gates as a crowd gathered. The same people who once bowed now hurled stones, curses, and filth. Her silk gown was torn, blood welling on her cheek. She managed one last, desperate look back toward the manor, toward the balcony where she and Cedric had once watched the sun set together. And there he stood, Eli, watching. Their eyes met for a single, soul-crushing second. His expression was unreadable, a mask that showed neither grief nor remorse. Only a quiet, chilling triumph. As the heavy gates of her life slammed shut behind her, Octavia's sobs were stolen by the wind. Her world had ended that day. She had lost her husband, her honor, and her very place in the world. All destroyed by the one man her husband had called brother. The forest had long since accepted her as one of its own. Its silence, its thorns, its shifting shadows, these were her only companions now. Octavia's once soft hands were now rough and calloused from years of cutting wood, washing her linens in the icy stream, and gathering herbs whose names she'd long forgotten. The grand hallways of marble and gold that once echoed with her laughter were replaced by the mournful creak of her cottage walls and the lonely hoot of a distant owl. Months had passed since anyone had seen her. The villagers at the foot of the hill spoke her name only in hushed, fearful tones. None dared approach the ruined cottage, terrified that the murderer of Lord Cedric would claim them next. But Octavia had no hate left to give. Only a bottomless, abiding grief. Every dawn, she sat by her cracked window and watched the mist roll across the woods like a ghostly tide. The faint light that broke through the trees reminded her of mornings shared with Cedric, his laughter as he teased her for sleeping too long, the warmth of his hand on hers as they broke their fast. Those memories cut deeper than any blade. Yet, she clung to them like lifelines in a sea of sorrow. She had learned to survive on roots, berries, and the occasional rabbit snared in her traps. The forest was merciless, but her will was iron. She built her fire with care, guarded her cottage like a wounded bird, and spoke only to the moon. "If you can hear me," she would whisper each night, her eyes glistening. "Let him rest. Let his soul find peace, even if mine never will." The dawn broke quietly over the kingdom, painting the palace roofs in a wash of gold. In the grand courtyard, Queen Mother Beatrix stood beside her silver chariot, wrapped in a deep blue cloak embroidered with crescent moons. Her heart was a heavy stone in her chest. For weeks, the nightmares had returned, the same haunting vision of a weeping woman beneath a bleeding moon. She believed the goddess was speaking to her. "I will go to the temple," she told her maid, her voice strained. "Perhaps the moon will show me the meaning of these dreams." Her guards pleaded with her to take a larger escort, but Beatrix was resolute. "It is sacred ground. No harm will come to me under the moon's own watch." But fate had other, crueler plans. The journey began in peace. The ancient woods surrounding the temple were a cathedral of quiet whispers. The horses moved steadily, their hooves soft on the mossy path. Beatrix breathed in the scent of pine and damp earth, and for the first time in days, her heart began to settle. Then, the wind shifted. It came as a faint rustle at first, then a low, guttural growl. One of the guards halted, raising a hand. "My queen," he warned, his voice tight. "Something moves in the trees." Before another word could be spoken, the woods erupted. Dark shapes launched from the shadows. Wolves, massive, wild, their eyes burning with crimson fury. The air filled with snarls and the sickening clang of steel as her guards shifted, meeting the attackers head-on. Beatrix watched in horror as the battle turned into a slaughter. Her soldiers fought with valor, but the rogue wolves were too many, too savage. One by one, her protectors fell, their valiant howls silenced by the very moonlight filtering through the trees. A searing pain ripped through her shoulder. She screamed, stumbling backward as her own wolf spirit surged within her. With a shuddering breath, she surrendered to the shift, bones twisting, silver fur bursting forth. A majestic, silver-white wolf now stood where the queen had been. Her instincts screamed a single command: run. She darted through the forest, a silver streak stained with her own blood. The dying cries of her guards echoed behind her, a horrifying chorus. Twigs snapped beneath her paws, the metallic scent of blood filled her nostrils. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to survive. The rogues were relentless, their snarls closing in. Her vision blurred, every step a fresh agony. The forest seemed to spin her in cruel circles until she no longer knew north from south. And then, silence. The rogues had stopped. Perhaps they had lost her scent. Perhaps the moon herself had hidden her beneath her silver gaze. Beatrix stumbled into a small clearing, her body trembling, her strength utterly spent. She shifted back into her human form, her regal gown torn and bloody, her body shaking violently. The wind whispered through the trees, and with it came a faint, but undeniable scent: wood smoke. Someone lives here, she thought, the hope a weak flutter in her chest. She tried to move toward it. Her vision swam. The world tilted on its axis. She reached out, her fingers brushing the wet, cold grass as she collapsed. Her last sight before the darkness claimed her was a small cottage a few feet away. A humble, crumbling thing, with smoke curling from its chimney and the soft, golden light of a fire glowing through its window. Octavia had just returned from the forest, a bow slung over her shoulder and a handful of bitter berries in her palm. She stopped dead when she saw the shape on the ground near her fence. A woman, frail and wounded, her torn gown glistening with fresh blood. Her heart clenched. Without a second thought, she dropped her things and ran. Moon above, Octavia gasped, kneeling in the damp grass. The woman's pulse was a faint, fluttering bird against her fingertips. Her lips were pale as death. Octavia tore a strip from her own ragged dress and pressed it hard against the deepest wound. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice firm. "Please, you're safe now." She didn't know who this stranger was, only that she could not, would not, leave her to die. Summoning a strength she didn't know she possessed, Octavia lifted the unconscious woman and carried her into the cottage, laying her gently by the hearth's warmth. The stranger's breathing was shallow, her skin as pale as moonlight. Her silver hair was matted with blood. "Who did this to you?" Octavia whispered, her voice shaking with a fury she hadn't felt in years. But there was no answer. Only a faint, ragged breath. Octavia sprang into action. She fetched warm water and tore her last clean sheets into bandages. Her hands, though trembling, worked with a practiced efficiency as she cleaned the vicious gashes. One wound was deep, terribly deep. But Octavia refused to surrender her. "Stay with me," she murmured, pressing a damp cloth to the woman's fevered brow. "You will be fine. Just breathe." Outside, the night wind howled, carrying the deep, menacing growl of a predator. It circled the cottage, its glowing eyes flashing in the darkness. But for the first time, Octavia ignored it. Tonight, someone needed her more than her fears did. Hours slipped by. The candles burned low, and Octavia's arms ached with exhaustion. She mixed her gathered herbs, rosemary for the fever, silver leaf for the pain, and boiled them in a clay pot until the cottage filled with a soft, soothing scent. Carefully, she lifted the woman's head and pressed the rim of the potion to her lips. "Drink," Octavia whispered, a desperate prayer. "Please, drink." A weak moan escaped the woman's mouth, but she swallowed. A wave of sheer relief flooded Octavia's chest. She smiled faintly, brushing the damp silver hair from the woman's face. "You'll make it," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I promise you, you'll make it." By dawn, the stranger's breathing had steadied into a gentle rhythm. Exhausted, Octavia slumped beside the fire. She hadn't slept all night, her eyelids heavy as stone, yet her heart felt strangely, impossibly light. For the first time in years, her cottage was not filled with silence, but with the sound of a life she had saved. When morning broke, a faint voice stirred her from a half-sleep. "Where am I?" Octavia blinked, startled. The woman's eyes were open, gray and deep, like storm clouds. Confusion lingered in them, but beneath it was a flicker of life. "You're safe," Octavia said gently, leaning closer. "You were hurt. I found you outside my door." The woman tried to sit up, but winced, pressing a hand to her side. Octavia helped her rest back against the pillow. Don't move too much, she warned. You lost a lot of blood. You are lucky the goddess spared you. The woman's gaze drifted around the small cottage, the wooden walls, the herbs hanging from the ceiling, the little fire crackling near her feet. It was all so humble. So quiet. You live here alone? She asked softly. Octavia nodded, a shadow passing behind her eyes. For a long time now. Something in her tone made the woman's heart ache. She studied the young face before her, tired eyes, worn hands, but a beauty that hardship had not been able to erase. There was a quiet strength in her, the kind forged only in the fires of great pain. Why? The old woman asked. Why live in such solitude? Octavia offered a sad, fleeting smile and turned away. Because the world left me no other choice. The woman fell silent, sensing a depth of sorrow she did not yet understand. Octavia stood and stirred the pot hanging over the fire. You should eat. You need your strength. She poured warm broth into a wooden bowl and held it out. It's not much, but it will help. The old woman accepted it with trembling hands. The first sip brought unexpected tears to her eyes, not because of the taste, but because a stranger had cared enough to feed her. I owe you my life, she murmured. Octavia shook her head. No one owes kindness. The world would simply be a better place if we gave it freely. They spoke little after that. The silence between them was not heavy, but gentle, like two weary souls finding rest in each other's quiet company. As days melted into one another, the woman who called herself Bianca grew stronger. Each morning, Octavia changed her bandages, fetched fresh water, and gathered healing herbs. She spoke softly of the forest's rhythms, the phases of the moon, the creatures that passed her door. Beatrix listened, her curiosity deepening into a profound respect. One evening, with the fire burning low and the scent of pine drifting through the cottage walls, the woman finally asked the question that had been burning in her heart. What is your name, my dear? Octavia, she said simply. Octavia, Beatrix repeated, testing the sound on her tongue as if it were a long-forgotten melody. That is a beautiful name. Thank you, Octavia replied. And you? May I know the name of the woman I almost lost to death? Beatrix hesitated. For a moment, the truth sat on her tongue. But then she remembered the weight of her crown, the danger her true identity could bring to this peaceful place. My name is Bianca, she lied gently. I was on my way to the temple when I was attacked. Octavia nodded, her expression serene. Then perhaps the goddess brought you here for a reason. By the 7th morning, the Queen Mother could stand. Her wounds had closed into pale scars, her strength returning day by day under Octavia's unwavering care. The days had been a gentle balm, filled with quiet conversations and the soft, healing music of the wind through the trees. Yet, a powerful curiosity stirred in Beatrix's chest, a need to know the soul of the woman who had saved her. That evening, as the fire crackled and the forest hummed its nightly hymn, Beatrix finally gave voice to her question. Octavia, may I know your story? Octavia, who had been grinding herbs by the hearth, froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic rasp of the pestle. My story, she repeated softly, as if speaking to a ghost. It is not a pleasant one. Please, Beatrix said, sitting straighter. I would still hear it. Octavia looked into the fire, its light painting her face in gold and shadow, revealing a beauty and a sorrow that time had been unable to erase. I was once Lady Octavia Vaughan, she began, her voice distant, reaching across the years. Wife to Lord Cedric Vaughan of the Eastern Court. He was a noble man. Kind, patient, and just. We had a life filled with peace. Beatrix's chest tightened. Vaughan. She knew that name. It had echoed through her palace halls the year a beloved lord was found dead, and his wife accused of the most heinous betrayal. Octavia continued, unaware of the storm she was stirring in her listener's heart. Cedric had a friend, she said, the name a bitter poison on her tongue. Eli. The court praised him as loyal and wise. But behind his smiles, he hid something far darker. He desired me, and he made his desire known, even while my husband yet lived. Beatrix's fingers curled into fists in her lap. I told him no, Octavia whispered, the memory raw. I told him I would never betray my husband. Her eyes glistened in the firelight, hard and bright. He laughed. He said I would come to him, when my husband was gone. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air between them. I did not understand what he meant, Octavia said, her voice dropping to a haunted hush. Not until it was too late. One night, Cedric collapsed after drinking from his cup. They found him poisoned. Eli was the first to comfort me, the first to whisper that perhaps my husband had made powerful enemies. But days later, Octavia continued, the words ash in her mouth, after he tried to force himself upon me and I fought him off, he stood before the court and swore he had seen me poison the wine. He told them I killed Cedric for his fortune. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with a rage that had been caged for years. They believed him. The Queen Mother, the council, everyone. He had bribed and threatened my servants until their lies painted me a monster. No one defended me. No one asked for mercy. Beatrix's eyes filled with tears she dared not let fall. The memory crashed over her. Eli's calm, convincing voice, his performative grief. She had believed him. She had signed the decree, pressing her royal seal onto the parchment that sealed this woman's ruin. I begged for a fair trial, Octavia whispered, her voice thick with the ghost of past pleas. I swore on my husband's grave that I was innocent. But the more I pleaded, the more they saw only the guilt he had crafted for me. Her gaze was distant, seeing the ghosts in the fire. They stripped me of everything, my name, my lands, my jewels. I remember standing before them in chains as the Queen Mother read my sentence. Beatrix's breath caught in her throat, a silent sob. Octavia's eyes drifted to the window, where the moon hung like a silent witness. That night, they dragged me through the gates. The people, the same people who once smiled at me, threw stones. They shouted, murderer, and cursed widow. I walked until my feet bled, and I did not stop until I reached these woods. I have lived here ever since. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the cottage. The fire crackled, its light trembling as if sharing their anguish. Beatrix's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to speak, to scream her confession, but guilt wrapped around her throat like a noose. Did no one ever come to your aid? She finally managed, though she already knew the answer. No one, Octavia said, the words final as a tombstone closing. Eli made sure of that. He comes here often in his wolf form, a shadow in the night, just to remind me that he owns my fear. Beatrix's lips parted in a sharp gasp. He still haunts you? Yes, Octavia replied, her voice a thin thread of exhaustion. I see his eyes in the dark. I hear his growl. He never lets me forget that he won. She looked down at her worn hands. But I still pray for my husband's soul. And for justice, even if it comes long after I am dust. Beatrix's heart shattered. The fire popped softly as tears, hot and shameful, finally rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth to stifle the sob fighting to escape. Octavia noticed. Bianca? She asked softly. Are you unwell? Beatrix wiped her tears hastily, forcing a fragile smile. It is nothing, my dear. Your story, it is a heavy burden. It touches the soul. No woman deserves such cruelty. Octavia gave a faint, weary nod. It no longer hurts as it once did. Pain dulls when one has no choice but to live with it. She was innocent. The truth screamed in Beatrix's mind, a searing brand of anguish. I condemned her with my own hand. That night, long after Octavia had succumbed to an exhausted sleep, Beatrix remained awake, staring into the dying embers. She saw her own reflection in the fading glow, a queen, a judge, a fool. She heard the echo of her own voice from years past, stern and cold with power, reading the sentence that shattered a life. How blind I was, she whispered into the stillness. How cruelly blind. She thought of Eli's face at the trial, his practiced sorrow, his trembling voice. How could she not have seen the deceit? The lies? Tears streamed down her face as the full, horrific weight of her mistake settled in her soul. The moon had not sent her here by chance. She had been led to this humble cottage to face her greatest sin, to right a wrong that had cried out to the heavens for justice. The night grew heavy, clouds smothering the mow. On until only a ghostly shimmer lit the forest. Inside, the fire breathed its last warm breaths into the silence. Beatrix lay awake on her straw pallet, Octavia's story a relentless storm in her mind. Octavia herself sat by the hearth, her slender fingers mending a piece of cloth, her eyes seeing a different time, a different life. How have you survived here, all alone? Beatrix whispered, her voice raw. Octavia lifted her head slowly, a sad, fleeting smile gracing her lips. I suppose because I had to. When the world turns away from you, you learn to live with what is left. Beatrix turned her gaze to the fire. And Eli? She asked, her voice careful. Octavia's hands stilled. The cloth slipped from her lap. He comes every night, she said, her voice barely audible. Growling, circling, her eyes lifted toward the window, where the darkness pressed in like a living beast. He cannot have me, yet he will not let me rest. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the forest, as if summoned by their words. Beatrix shivered, drawing her shawl tighter. The air turned to ice. The growl became a snarl. Heavy paws crushed leaves, circling closer. Octavia stood, moving to the window with a calm that stole Beatrix's breath. The fire painted her silhouette in gold and shadow. He's here, she whispered. Beatrix rose, her chest tight with a primal fear, and joined Octavia at the window. Together, they peered into the abyss. Two burning, intelligent eyes glared back from the gloom. The wolf's black fur was a void, its fangs gleaming like daggers. It growled, a sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the cottage. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished back into the trees. Beatrix turned to Octavia, her face pale. You have endured this, every night? Octavia nodded faintly. For years. Beatrix's heart broke anew. She reached out, taking Octavia's work-roughened hand in her own. You have suffered too long, she said, her voice trembling with a newfound resolve. No soul should bear such torment. The wicked thrive while the good are cast aside. This is not the way of the goddess. Octavia offered a faint, heartbreaking smile. I used to think the same. But I've learned to live with silence. It hurts less than false hope. In that moment, Beatrix saw it, true nobility. Not in crowns or jewels, but in the unbroken grace that faced utter ruin. A silent, steel vow formed in her heart. This cannot remain hidden, Beatrix said, her tone low and fierce. The world must know the truth. Octavia, you deserve justice. What was stolen from you must be returned. Octavia's eyes shimmered. I've stopped hoping for such things. Then let me hope for you, Beatrix declared. I will see that justice is done. I swear it. Octavia looked at her, truly startled by the ferocity in the old woman's voice. You speak as though you have the power to change things. Beatrice smiled, a sad, secret thing. Perhaps I do. Or perhaps I will find someone who does. She did not reveal herself. Instead, she squeezed Octavia's hand, her grip warm and sure. You have a kind heart, she whispered. And the moon does not turn away from the kind. The goddess sees all, even what men hide. The first rays of dawn crept into the cottage, a gentle benediction after the long night. Beatrix knew it was time. Her body was healed, but her soul was now burdened with a sacred purpose. Octavia stood by the door, her hands clasped, watching her prepare to leave. You're leaving? She asked, worry lining her voice. I must, Beatrix said, fastening her cloak. There are things that must be set right. Let me at least walk you to the ridge. The woods are dangerous. No, child. The moon will watch my path. Beatrix took Octavia's hands in hers. You saved my life, yet you ask for nothing. One doesn't need a reason to show kindness, Octavia replied with a humble shrug. It was simply the right thing to do. Beatrix's eyes softened as she memorized the face before her, the weariness, the dignity, the light that refused to be extinguished. I meant what I said last night, Beatrix whispered. Things will be different. Octavia smiled, a fragile, sad expression. I've stopped waiting for change. But your words are enough. They make the day a little warmer. Hold on to that warmth, Beatrix said, her voice thick with promise. Because soon, the night will end. With that, she turned and stepped into the misty morning. The forest swallowed her figure, leaving Octavia alone in the doorway, silent tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. For the first time in years, the silence that returned to the cottage was not empty. It was filled with the fragile, terrifying whisper of hope. The palace was a world of cold marble and gleaming gold, a stark contrast to the earthy warmth of the cottage. Alpha King Orion stood on his balcony, his gaze sweeping the distant forests. The crown on his head was a weight he had long accepted, a symbol of a power that had cost him his heart. The doors opened behind him. Mother, he said flatly, without turning. You return. And you seem to have missed me, despite the weight you carry, Beatrix countered, her steps soft on the stone. A king's weight never leaves, he replied, a faint, humorless smirk on his lips. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind tugging at her veil. I met someone, she said quietly. Orion turned slightly, a single brow raised in question. Someone? A woman. In the forest. She saved my life. His frown was immediate. You went to the temple. How did a forest dweller save Queen Mother? I was attacked by rogues. My escort was slaughtered. I would not be here if not for her kindness. Who is she? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Beatrix chose her words with care. An outcast. A widow who lives with nothing, yet gave everything to a stranger. She paused, letting the name hang in the air between them. Her name is Octavia. Orion's eyes darkened with recognition. Octavia, he repeated. The woman accused of murdering Lord Cedric. Yes, Beatrix said, her voice firm. But not everything told in court is truth. Mother, he said, turning away, his tone dismissive. Do not let pity cloud your judgment. The council found her guilty. The law decided. The law was deceived. Beatrix's voice cut through his dismissal, sharp and sure. He blinked, startled by her force. I looked into that woman's eyes, Orion. I saw truth there. Sorrow, but not guilt. She has been wronged. The king exhaled slowly, a weary sound. Even if you are right, it is not our concern. The past is gone. You speak as though you have no heart left, my son. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Perhaps I don't. Hearts are fragile. I have seen too many faces mask greed with love. Is that what you believe? She asked, her voice softening with sorrow. That love is but a disguise? Love is a luxury the powerful cannot afford, Orion stated, his voice low and final. Women seek power, not love. Affection fades. Ambition does not. Beatrix's chest ached for the man he had become, hardened by betrayal, isolated by power. Not all women are driven by greed, Orion. Some still carry a pure light within them. I have seen it. I have felt it. You speak of this Octavia as though she were a saint. Not a saint, Beatrix corrected gently. Just a woman who chose kindness when the world gave her every reason to choose hate. She stepped closer. She lives in solitude, yet opened her door to a dying stranger. She gave warmth when she had little, and mercy when she had nothing to gain. If there is any goodness left in this world, Orion, it lives in her. The king fell silent. The sunlight caught the edge of his crown, setting it ablaze. Even if what you say is true, he said at last, I cannot act on pity. I am a king, not a redeemer. Beatrix smiled, a knowing, gentle curve of her lips. No, but perhaps the moon will show you that some hearts are still worth believing in. He frowned. What are you suggesting? Nothing, she whispered, only that sometimes, to see the truth, one must look with different eyes. As she left the chamber, Orion stood alone, her words echoing in the vast, empty space. He told himself it was nonsense, a sentimental tale from a mother's soft heart. But deep within the fortress of his pride, a quiet, treacherous thought began to uncoil. Who is this woman who could move my mother so deeply? His gaze was drawn back to the balcony, to the distant, mist-shrouded woods where a story of injustice, and a flicker of hope, awaited. Was waiting, and though he did not yet know it, her quiet strength was about to shatter the fortress around his heart and alter the destiny of his kingdom forever. The morning sun spilled softly over the forest, its golden rays painting the damp leaves and glistening streams. Birds sang in gentle harmony, as if blessing the new day. But within the palace, Alpha King Orion sat upon his throne in heavy silence, his mother's words a relentless echo in his mind. She is not what the world painted her to be. There is a goodness in her eyes that no lie can bury. The words clung to him, a ghost he could not silence. For nights, he found no rest, haunted not by threats of war or betrayal, but by the phantom image of a woman he had never met, a widow who had lost everything, yet still possessed the strength to offer a stranger mercy. Finally, one cold morning, he surrendered to the pull. He cast aside his royal garments, trading his crown for a simple, hooded cloak, and slipped from the palace like a shadow. He rode alone, following the path his mother had described. He wanted no guards, no ceremony, no bowing. He sought only the unvarnished truth. Hours passed. The forest grew dense, shadows pooling beneath the ancient trees. The howl of a distant wolf carried on the wind, a lonely sound. His horse grew skittish, snorting at the rustle in the undergrowth. Orion calmed the beast with a soft word, then dismounted, continuing on foot. Then, the sky turned against him. A sudden storm devoured the sun, and rain fell in a furious, drenching curtain. His cloak became a leaden weight, the path a river of mud. He pressed on, driven by a need he could no longer deny, until at last he stumbled into a small clearing. There it stood, a humble cottage, exactly as his mother had said. He hesitated, his pride warring with a desperate, physical need. He was a king who had never begged for anything. But the cold and the fatigue were merciless, respecting no title. At last, he knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a woman wrapped in a faded shawl. Her eyes, a calm, deep gray, widened slightly at the sight of him, a drenched and shivering stranger on her step. "Please," he said, his voice low, his gaze lowered in a gesture foreign to him. "I mean no harm. I only seek shelter from the storm." Her expression softened, a quiet empathy transforming her features. "Come in," she said, her voice steady. "Before the rain steals what strength you have left." He stepped inside, water dripping from his cloak onto her wooden floor. The warmth of the cottage enveloped him like an embrace. The air was rich with the scent of herbs, firewood, and simple, hearty food. She moved with a quiet grace, her hands, though worn, gentle as she guided him to a seat by the fire. "You look half frozen," she murmured, a faint, kind smile touching her lips. "Sit, traveler. You'll catch your death out there." He obeyed, his heart thudding in a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. There was something in her voice, a soft steadiness, a fragile strength, that disarmed him completely. As she prepared a bowl of stew, his eyes traced the lines of her face. She was beautiful, not in the polished way of court ladies, but in a way that was quiet and real, like a forgotten melody. Her eyes held a deep wisdom, and a sorrow that spoke of a heart that had been broken, yet had not turned to stone. She placed the bowl before him. The steam rose, a promise of warmth and sustenance. "Eat," she said simply. He took a spoonful. The taste was humble, yet perfectly seasoned, made with care. He looked up, genuinely surprised. "This is good," he admitted. She smiled. "It's nothing special." "Even so," he said, his voice softening. "You shared it with a stranger." Her gaze drifted to the window, where the rain beat a frantic rhythm against the glass. "We're all strangers," she replied, "until kindness makes us otherwise." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Humbled, he felt that her small, simple cottage held more true sanctity than his entire palace hall. They sat in a comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire their only conversation. Finally, he spoke again. "You live here alone?" "Yes," she said. "The world beyond these woods has no place for me." "Why?" he asked, though he knew the answer. She hesitated, her eyes lowering to her hands. "People believe what they're told. Sometimes, no truth can shout louder than a well-crafted lie." The pain in her voice, though carefully hidden, pierced him. He remembered the rumors, the murderess, the witch, the outcast widow. And in that moment, he saw with stunning clarity the truth his mother had tried to show him. "You've known sorrow," he said softly. She offered a sad, quiet chuckle. "Haven't we all?" He wanted to tell her then. To reveal that he held the power to restore her name, to sweep away the shadows that haunted her. But something, shame, or perhaps a profound, newfound awe, kept him silent. For the first time in his life, he wanted to be seen not as a king, but simply as a man. Night fell. She gave him a blanket by the fire. "Rest," she said. "The storm will pass." As he lay there, feigning sleep, he watched her mend an old shawl by candlelight. Her fingers moved with patience, her face a portrait of calm resilience. And for the first time in years, Orion felt a peace that had nothing to do with conquest or power. It was a soft, pure thing, and it settled deep in his soul. By dawn, the storm had cleared, and the forest glittered with dew. But a greater change had taken place within the king. The armor around his heart had cracked, and through that crack, a long-forgotten light began to pour. He no longer saw an outcast. He saw a woman who, having lost everything, still found a reason to offer kindness. And the mighty Alpha King understood a truth he had long forgotten, that kindness was not weakness. It was the purest, most formidable strength of all. Though he left her cottage that morning as quietly as he had come, a solemn vow had been born within him. He would return, not as a beggar, not as a king, but as a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. The days slipped into weeks, quiet and gentle as the forest wind. Sunlight dappled through the trees once more, and the world seemed softer. Orion came often now, always in his traveler's guise. He told Octavia he was a wanderer, a man seeking peace away from the world's noise. She never pressed him, perhaps seeing a kindred solitude in his eyes. At first, his visits came with excuses, a gift of wild herbs, a bundle of firewood. Soon, they needed no reason. He would arrive as she fetched water or tended her garden, and she would smile, as if she had been waiting for him. Their companionship grew like ivy on an old wall, slow, steady, and undeniable. One afternoon, they sat beneath a wide tree. She wove a basket, he sharpened a fishing spear. The air was cool, scented with pine and rain-washed earth. "Tell me," she said softly, her fingers never stilling. "Where did you live before you began wandering?" He chose his words with care. "Far from here. A place where I once believed I had everything. Power, loyalty, respect. But I discovered they meant nothing when the heart is empty." She looked up, her brow faintly lined. "So you left it all behind?" "I had to," he said quietly. The walls began to feel like a prison. Everyone wanted something, except the truth. Her eyes softened with a deep understanding. "You sound like someone who has been betrayed." He offered a bitter smile. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply expected too much of people." She stopped her work, gazing into the forest as if seeing her own reflection in his words. "People disappoint," she whispered. "But not everyone does." Their eyes met. Something unspoken, warm and cautious, passed between them. That evening, as they ate by the fire, Orion found himself laughing, a real, deep, unguarded sound that startled him with its genuineness. Octavia's laughter joined his, light and melodic, filling the cottage with a life it had not known in years. For her, too, something had shifted. She had grown so accustomed to silence that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. This stranger had become her companion, her friend. He was gentle. He never pried into her wounds, but listened when she spoke of her husband, of the art she missed, of kindness as if it were a treasure. And she found herself drawn to the calm in his voice, the sadness in his eyes that mirrored her own. There was a nobility in his bearing, though he never boasted. He spoke like a man used to command, yet he treated her words with reverence. One day, as they lifted a heavy log together, their hands brushed. It was a fleeting touch, but both froze. Octavia's heart fluttered wildly, a flush warming her cheeks. Orion felt it too, a sudden, raw, disarming current. He drew his hand back slowly, his throat tight. "Forgive me," he murmured. "There is nothing to forgive," she whispered, though her voice trembled. From that day, a delicate, hesitant affection began to bloom between them. They shared stories from their broken hearts, he, of the loneliness of power, she, of the loneliness of being hated unjustly. In their shared brokenness, they found a strange and powerful comfort. Octavia began to dream again, not of vengeance, but of laughter and warmth. The black wolf's howls no longer haunted her nights. Instead, she clung to a fragile, precious hope. Orion, too, was transformed. Back at the palace, his guards noticed a new calm in his tone, a gentleness in his judgments. His mother saw it most of all and smiled her silent, knowing smile. Each time he left the palace, he was drawn back to that small cottage, to a warmth he found nowhere else. The once quiet widow began to smile more often. The once broken king began to heal. The fire burned softly that evening, its glow dancing on the humble walls. Outside, a gentle wind whispered through a peaceful forest. The black wolf had not been seen for many nights. Octavia sat by the hearth, weaving a new blanket. Orion sat near her, sharpening a knife, though his focus was elsewhere. A restless energy had plagued him all day. Every time he looked at her calm strength, her unshaken grace, the lie he lived burned hotter in his chest. He had to tell her. The fear of losing what they had built was a cold knot in his stomach, but the weight of his deception was becoming unbearable. Octavia, he said softly, breaking the silence. She looked up, a faint smile on her lips. He began, his tone feigning casual curiosity. If the Alpha King himself stood before you and asked for your hand, what would you do? Octavia laughed, a warm, genuine sound. The Alpha King? I would say no. Orion raised a brow, both amused and wounded. No? She nodded, a playful sparkle in her eyes. Because a king's heart belongs to his kingdom, not to love. He would see me as a burden, not a blessing. Her woe. RDS, though spoken without malice, pierced him deeply. He swallowed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. What if I were the king, and I loved you still? The question hung in the air, fragile and profound. The fire crackled softly between them. Octavia's hands stilled. Her gaze rose to meet his, and in it, he saw a tenderness that saw past every disguise, straight into the soul of the man beneath. She rose slowly and moved to where he sat. Kneeling beside him, she cupped his face in her hands, her thumb gently brushing the stubble on his cheek. Then, she whispered, her voice steady and sure, I would still choose you. Because I knew your heart long before I ever knew your crown. Her words shattered the last of his defenses. He had heard a lifetime of flattery and lies, but this was raw, unvarnished truth. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, his heart trembling. When he opened them again, they were no longer the eyes of a wandering traveler. They held the depth of a king, the weight of authority, and the terrifying vulnerability of a man in love. He reached for her hand, holding it as if it were his only anchor. Octavia, he said, his voice trembling with the weight of his confession. There is something I must tell you. I can no longer keep it hidden. She blinked, sensing the profound shift in the air. What is it? He rose to his feet, stepping back to give her space. His heart hammered against his ribs as he drew off the worn, muddy cloak and straightened his posture. Even in the dim firelight, a new, formidable presence settled around him, the aura of command, of sovereignty, of a king. A quiet power filled the small cottage, commanding and regal, as tangible as the fire's heat. I am not a traveler, he said, his voice low and steady, each word weighted with truth. I am Orion, Alpha King of the Western Realms. The words landed not as a proclamation, but as a thunderclap in the fragile silence. Octavia froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as moonlight. The fire's crackle seemed to mock the stillness that followed. Her lips parted in sheer disbelief. No, she breathed, a nervous, disbelieving laugh escaping her. No, that's not possible. You're joking. That's cruel, even in jest. He stepped closer, his expression etched with pain and sincerity. I wish it were a jest. But it is the truth, Octavia. The man you nursed, the one you shared your bread with, is your king. She stumbled back, her hands beginning to tremble. Her mind raced, reassembling every moment, his innate grace, the quiet authority that sometimes surfaced, the simplicity of his words that now seemed profound. It all made a terrible, perfect sense. Her eyes welled with tears of confusion and betrayal. Why, she whispered, the word. Sharp as a blade. Why deceive me? He looked down, shame shadowing his proud features. Because I needed to see you without the crown between us. To know if the kindness my mother spoke of was real. She told me of the woman who saved her life in the woods, the widow to whom she owed everything. I had to see you for myself. I had to know who you truly were. Octavia pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Your mother? Yes, Orion said softly, his gaze unwavering. The old woman you found on your doorstep. That was my mother, Queen Mother Beatrix. He took a step closer, his voice filled with awe. You saved her life, Octavia. She spoke of your grace, your faith, your courage. She said she had met a woman pure enough to shame the stars. Octavia's breath caught. Her heart thundered painfully against her ribs. All this time, she whispered, the world tilting on its axis. You knew? I knew, he admitted, the confession quiet and raw. Tears spilled over, hot and fast. She turned away, a storm of awe and anger, humility and heartbreak warring within her. You're the Alpha King, she said, her voice breaking, and yet you sat at my table like a beggar. You ate my food. You slept beside my fire. I did, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Because I wanted to understand the woman the kingdom had destroyed. I needed to see with my own eyes what true nobility looks like. His gaze held hers, filled with a reverence that stole her breath. And you showed me, Octavia. You showed me everything I had forgotten to believe in. Her breath hitched. But I'm no one now. A name erased. A woman scorned. He closed the distance between them, taking her trembling hands in his. His voice was steady, soft, and filled with a conviction that shook her to her core. No, he whispered. You were the woman who saved my mother. You were the one who taught a king compassion. You made me believe in love again. He brought her hands to his chest, letting her feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. You healed more than her wounds, Octavia. You healed my heart. Her tears fell freely then. She could barely breathe, the truth too large, too overwhelming. The king stood before her, his disguise fallen away, and in his eyes, she saw not pity, but a devotion so deep it felt like coming home. He cupped her face gently, his thumb wiping away her tears. And I will love to heal yours, too. The words broke her completely. All her walls, all her years of caution, melted away. She saw no crown, no title, only the man who had shared her solitude, who had seen her without judgment, who had listened to her heart when the world had silenced it. Slowly, hesitantly, their faces drew near. The fire crackled softly behind them, a witness to the trembling space between their breaths. And then, like a prayer whispered to the moon, their lips met. The kiss was soft, a trembling union full of everything they had feared to feel. It was not a king claiming a subject, nor a widow seeking solace. It was the meeting of two broken souls, finally finding their home. When they parted, Octavia rested her forehead against his, her voice shaking. You shouldn't love me. I bring nothing but shame. He smiled faintly, a true, unguarded smile that lit his eyes. Then let the king share that shame with you, he murmured. For what is a crown, if it cannot protect the purest heart in its realm? She closed her eyes, her tears mingling with a laugh that was both fragile and free. That night, under the silent gaze of the moon, two hearts that had wandered through pain and loneliness finally found their truth, not in power or revenge, but in a love that was raw, real, and utterly unguarded. Far away, in the quiet halls of the palace, Queen Mother Beatrix stood by her window, looking out at the same moonlit sky. A knowing, deeply satisfied smile touched her lips. The threads of fate were finally weaving themselves right. The moon was high when Orion returned to the palace, its silver light a silent witness to the transformation in his soul. His mother awaited him in her chamber. You went to her, she said quietly, not a question, but a statement. Yes, he answered, his voice resonating with a new certainty. And everything you said was true. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence heavy with the weight of a past injustice. Then Orion's tone hardened, the Alpha King's command returning, now fueled by a righteous purpose. We must reopen Lord Cedric's case. Tonight. Beatrix exhaled a breath she seemed to have held for years. I have waited to hear you say those words, she murmured, relief and guilt washing through her. I signed her exile myself. I thought I was serving justice, but I was only blinded by Eli's lies. They summoned the royal council before dawn. Dusty, sealed scrolls from the old trial were brought into the great hall, where moonlight poured through stained glass, painting the floor in colors of truth and consequence. Witnesses were recalled, servants, guards, scribes, all gathered under the solemn gaze of their rulers. As Beatrix addressed them, her voice carried both the weight of her authority and the burden of her remorse. We are here to reopen a case once closed by deceit. The death of Lord Cedric of House Vaughan. Gasps rippled through the room. The name was a legendary scandal, a stain on the kingdom's honor. But tonight, that stain would be cleansed. Meanwhile, Orion dispatched his elite guards to the edge of the woods with a single, clear order. Watch the widow's cottage. If the Black Wolf appears, capture it alive. Days turned into weeks. The forest was eerily silent. But on the third week, under a sliver of a crescent moon, the stillness shattered. The Black Wolf returned. Its guttural growl echoed through the trees. It prowled, claws sinking into the earth, its crimson eyes fixed on the cottage where Octavia now stood firm behind her door. Hidden among the trees, the king's soldiers waited. Hold your ground, Captain Arland whispered. Wait for the signal. The wolf circled, snarling, a specter of hatred. Then it threw back its head and unleashed a furious howl into the night. That was the moment. Nets woven with silver threads shot from the shadows, glowing with captured moonlight. The beast roared, thrashing violently as the silver burned against its dark fur. Its howls twisted, distorting into human screams of anguish as the forced transformation began, bones snapping, fur retreating, until a man lay bound and defeated on the ground. It was Eli. Sweat and blood slicked his skin, but his eyes still blazed with a futile hatred. "Take him to the palace," Arland ordered grimly. "The king awaits." The morning air in the capital was thick with anticipation. A crowd had gathered since dawn, their whispers a restless tide. The man they had once cheered as a noble hero was dragged forward in chains. Liar. Murderer. The jeers rose like thunder, each word a stone striking the broken man. Queen Beatrix stood on the royal balcony, clad not in jewels, but in a simple black cloak of mourning. Her voice trembled as she spoke to her people. "I once called this man friend. I once trusted his word. But today we learn that envy can hide beneath a smile, and evil can wear the robe of righteousness." Her voice broke. "It was I who believed his lies. It was I who condemned an innocent woman. For that, my soul shall bear the scar forever." She bowed her head as tears streaked her cheeks. "But today, justice stands pure." The crowd fell silent as Alpha King Orion stepped forward. Clad in silver armor, his presence alone commanded stillness. "Bring him forth," he commanded. Eli was forced to his knees. He lifted his head, his face bruised, his eyes hollow. "Your Majesty," he rasped, his voice a broken thing. "I loved her. I loved Octavia, and she chose him. I killed Cedric because he had everything I wanted, her love, her faith, her light." A bitter, broken laugh escaped him. "But when I took him from her, she still would not look at me. She chose death over me, even when I offered her power." He looked up, a pathetic challenge in his gaze. "So tell me, my king, what would you have done if love drove you mad?" Orion's eyes remained as cold as winter stone. "I would have chosen honor over obsession," he replied, his voice quiet but absolute. "But you chose ruin." Eli's lips trembled, his eyed finally shattering. "I didn't mean to fall this far," he whispered, the frightened man within laid bare. "I just wanted her to love me." From the shadows, Octavia emerged. She pushed back her hood, standing silent and graceful, a vision of the life he had tried to destroy. Eli looked up and froze. "Octavia," he breathed. Her eyes held no hatred, only a profound, devastating sorrow. "You destroyed my life," she said softly, her voice carrying across the silent square. "You took everything from me. But I pity you, because you never understood love. You thought it was something you could take, not something that must be freely given." Her words were the final judgment, more piercing than any blade. Eli bowed his head, and for the first time, tears of pure shame rolled down his cheeks. The axe fell. The crowd erupted, but Octavia stood still amidst the chaos. A single tear traced her cheek, falling onto the earth that had once cursed her. "May your soul find the peace your heart never knew," she whispered to the wind. In the grand court, under a dome that seemed to hold the very sky, the council gathered. Octavia stood before them in a simple gray gown, the once scorned outcast, now with her head unbowed. Queen Beatrix rose, her voice thick with emotion. "Years ago, I passed judgment upon this woman," she declared. "I condemned her based on lies. But the moon, ever faithful, reveals truth in its own time." She then turned to Octavia and did the unthinkable, she bowed her head. "Forgive me, my child. Forgive a ruler who failed to see." Octavia's lips parted in shock. Slowly, she stepped forward and touched the queen's hands. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "the past cannot be undone. But your heart has healed what was broken. I hold no anger, only gratitude." Then, Alpha King Orion rose. His voice, strong and resonant, filled the hall. "Let it be known to all that Octavia of House Vaughn, widow of Lord Cedric, was falsely accused. Her name is clean. Her honor is restored." A roar of agreement thundered through the court. But Orion was not finished. He descended from his throne until he stood before her, a king humbled before the woman who had redeemed him. "Octavia," he said, his gaze tender yet commanding, "you have shown mercy when the world showed you none. You healed my mother's wounds, and in doing so, you unknowingly healed my heart. You are strength clothed in grace. Her breath trembled. Your Majesty, call me Orion, he gently interrupted. For I do not speak as your king alone. He took her hands, his eyes shining with a love that silenced the entire kingdom. You once said a king's heart belongs to his kingdom. But a kingdom is only whole when its Luna walks beside him. He went down on one knee. So I ask you, not as a ruler, but as a man. Will you stand by my side? Will you be my queen? Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she looked at the man, the king, the wanderer, her love, kneeling before her. She took his hands, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Orion, I will stand by you. Not as your redemption, but as your heart. A cheer erupted that shook the very foundations of the palace. The wolves in attendance lifted their heads and howled, a triumphant hymn to a new beginning. As the ceremony sealed their bond, a shimmer of silver light, the mark of the sacred wolf bond, spread beneath Octavia's skin, warm and alive. And though it was day, the moon broke through the clouds above the glass dome, bathing them in a silver benediction. The moon hears the cry of the just, Beatrix whispered through her tears. And today, it answers. Octavia stood beside Orion as the people chanted her name. Luna, Luna, Octavia. The same voices that once cursed her now hailed her as queen. Orion leaned close, his whisper for her alone. You were never the outcast, my love. You were the heart this kingdom forgot. Octavia smiled, her tears glimmering in the sacred light. And you, she whispered back, are the king who made me whole. That night, the palace shone brighter than it ever had. Wolves howled from every corner of the realm, their cries a song of renewal and peace. And far above them all, the moon watched, silent, eternal, and proud, its light resting upon the redeemed Luna and the king who dared to love her. The outcast was no more. The lost heart had been found. And under the silver gaze of destiny, a love pure and unbroken began its eternal reign. If you love passionate alpha-omega romances filled with fated mates and forbidden desire, hit like and subscribe. Join the pack and never miss a heartbeat of love, lust, and lunar destiny.